I don't think Bitcoin is a threat to anybody. I think it's a solution for everybody, including the most evil people in our world. Let's say you and I were part of the elite banking class of the world, right? And here this freedom grenade just landed in the room. It's like Satoshi updated the simulation.
So how has that impacted you? Do you feel more enlightened as a human being? Do you feel more aligned?
Oof, yeah, I don't know. That's wow. It was like the end of this nihilistic feeling that I had. Like, oh my gosh, this quite literally changes everything.
Mr. Eric V. Stacks, welcome to the Sovereign Mindset. It's good to have you here, man. How are you?
Doing really well, man. I'm grateful to be here, and I always enjoy chatting with you. So thanks for lining this up, man.
Cool, man. Well, look, I figure we get right into it, right? And set the stage of what's happening right now in the world regarding Bitcoin. We have ETFs. We have corporations putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. We have nation states talking about a strategic Bitcoin reserve. What else do we have? We have, nation states like El Salvador trying to make it legal tender, and, going through their trials and tribulations with that. But my question for you is, it's all clouded, right? In a little bit of scams, a little bit of shitcoining. And I'm wondering what's your take here as far as Bitcoin and its adoption, its integration into society, its emergence. How do you see that general landscape? What's your take?
Wow, that's a really large question. And in some ways, I'm like a little bit, you could say like kind of overwhelmed almost. Like there's so much happening. I feel like the game theory is playing out faster than most hardened Bitcoiners expected. But I think it's all pretty obvious. Like, the world needs a technically sound and ethically sound or thermodynamically sound economic instruments to preserve their economic energy with or capital with. And the rate in which people are grappling with it is happening pretty quickly, but there is clearly a lot of confusion. There's a lot of, scammy stuff taking place. And I think that that's all really expected. And so like I oscillate back and forth from being like really excited, like it's playing out just like everybody, has said it's going to. Then there's moments where I'm like, dang, this could take a lot longer. There's a lot of confusion. So I don't know. I'm a little bit overwhelmed with it all, but also very excited. And I think I've been spending a little bit more time than necessary trying to figure out like what's going to happen, because it's going to play out the way it's supposed to. I think that that's kind of like how life is. Everything in hindsight, happens seemingly perfectly if you go through life with that perspective. And that's the way I like to look at life. At least it feels good that way. Yeah, but I think it's just the game theory is playing out. Nation states, corporations, central banks, basically everybody from the individual to the central bank. We all have the same economic problem. We need a way to preserve our capital. We need a way for us to save our energy where it can't be violated by any other parties, individuals, institutions, governments, etc. So yeah, I think that people are figuring it out pretty quickly. It's pretty interesting watching the Trump administration kind of grapple with this. I do believe that, all the shitcoin commentary and all of that, I think it'll die out over time, but I also think it's expected. I kind of feel like Trump's taking a dragnet approach. He wants everything to be the best it's ever been. You couldn't even imagine how good it's going to be, right? And so I don't think that he could go into a digital asset reserve without kind of appeasing a lot of the crypto individuals, There was a Twitter poll, I think it was 2 years ago. This was before I got active on Twitter. Someone, I don't know who the individual who did the poll was, but they asked out of all the crypto individuals, how many of those people were Bitcoin only? And it was 13%. So if you go into this digital treasury, a sovereign wealth fund, if you're going to talk about all this stuff and you're like, it's Bitcoin only, you're definitely going to have a smaller audience there that's going to get excited about that. And I think Trump is a showman who wants to elicit the excitement. So I think that's kind of where the shitcoin commentary comes from.
So then regarding that, do you see then the kind of shitcoinery, the meme coins, the pump and dumps as just kind of part of the process into the inevitable like rise of Bitcoin and a Bitcoin standard?
I do, because I think, and I could say that for my own personal journey and many of the Bitcoiners that I have talked to, you get involved because when you hear the value proposition of that Bitcoin offers, it's very alluring for all the obvious reasons. But then you get kind of confused. You go to Coinbase or whatever platform, and I could say for me in like 2017, I'm like, okay, so you got this Bitcoin. You get onto YouTube, you start watching information, and then there's all these other coins available. And kind of going through that process of trying to discern what is actually viable for the long term, what's actually solving a problem, and then being so economically challenged through the fiat forces like that, those challenges that fiat imposes upon us, it does make it a little alluring to want to catch 1000x on something, right? And so I think that's kind of what's taking place on a mass scale, and there's a lot of, I don't know, hucksters and snake oil salesmen that just, hey, you can't get somebody's Bitcoin, but you could sell them a shitcoin. So there's a large incentive to figure out how to do that. And I think the people who lack deep, serious, solid moral integrity are, and maybe they're self-deluded as well. We're like, hey, we're just going to blockchainify everything. And then there's this monetary incentive to do it. And so I think there's a lot of deep confusion there. But the longer you think about it, and it becomes very obvious that Bitcoin is the only one that really matters. The rest, it's almost like Breedlove said this a long time ago when he's like, all the other coins are essentially like innovation theater, where it's like, oh, we're going to do all these cool things. And it's like, well, do we really need all that stuff? You don't need to have a decentralized proof of work distributed ledger to hold titles for real estate or to put somebody's IDs on. Like, I don't know what Cardano is. What are these guys doing? They're talking about blockchainifying personal identities. I don't even know what that means. Like when I was trying to understand like smart contracts and Ethereum, like the value proposition, like I'm not the smartest guy, but I'm not the dumbest guy. Like I couldn't understand, like, why do we need this? This just seems like a platform to build other cryptos on, and what problems are these other cryptos solving? Like what we need is we need an honest, immutable, decentralized ledger so that we can trade fairly. Like that's something that's really clear. We need a technology that allows us to trade fairly, to eliminate like what I see as a game theoretic fuckedness is what I call it. Because of the physicality of property, the requirement for having a trusted central third party to house the gold, then now you have a certificate, a derivative system on top of that. So you're trusting the party to be honest. And the market participant or the gold custodian become bank that can get away with being dishonest has an advantage in the marketplace. So that causes an enormous problem. It's an incentive to coercion, dishonesty, violence, and Bitcoin completely flips that on its head. And so the problems that Bitcoin can solve are so enormous that it makes the rest of it, it's just all noise. But there's like a journey to get to that point to understand that. And I think that that's kind of what we're seeing happen at scale with very important people like the president of our country, of the United States currently. I think he's kind of grappling. And there's also the incentives. He's got donors, all these people in his ear. And he's a successful business person and he's got a family. They all want to make money. And so I think there's a little bit of that carryover where it's like the way that you operated. And I call it the BB world, the before Bitcoin world. Like the way that you operate in the world to acquire resources has now changed as a result of Bitcoin. And I think people are slow to catch on to that.
So we're in an interesting time, right? It seems like for people that are aware and awake, it seems like a lot of the cracks are starting to show in the legacy system, right? And it would seem like Bitcoin being there as a giant mirror to expose all of that, one would come to recognize that and realize that it's a scarce, digital asset that's secured by thermodynamics and so forth. And as a as an avenue to park some of your wealth, it just makes sense, right? But it seems like that reasoning process isn't happening. What is it going to take for people to recognize the value proposition of Bitcoin, you think? Like, is it going to require hard times for people to finally make that connection and be like, oh, I finally understand why Bitcoin is important?
I think for most people, and it's kind of like Saylor says, you don't come to Bitcoin until you have a need to know. And so I think generally most people have to get into a place in their life where they have some sort of crisis, personal, economic. I have another buddy who kind of talks about, he goes, a lot of the Bitcoiners that he has become friends with over the years, they have pulled themselves through and endured some level of trauma in their life. And so I do think that in 2025, if you're a Bitcoin maximalist and you hold all of your savings in Bitcoin, I think that that's an indicator that you have endured some sort of challenge that you want to insulate yourself from. And I do think, though, that some of the people that the people that struggle to understand Bitcoin the most are the people who have been successful in the fiat paradigm. There's a cognitive dissonance there, and then things are working well for them. You know, the Cantillon class, the quintillionaires, the people who own the assets that are like, hey, I don't really understand what's the problem here? Like, things are doing fine. Like, my 27 rental houses just appreciated 10% last year, and I could leverage that and go buy more houses. And like, they don't really see that that's bifurcating our society and causing problems for other people. And then the thing that I think is really challenging is we all generally are first trying to serve our self-interest. And so when people are successfully doing so without a Bitcoin standard or a Bitcoin position, Bitcoin isn't that alluring to them because the current system and economic paradigm has been working for them. And yeah, I think that the number go up technology is going to be what captures those people in time, because they are, you hold a bunch of equities and real estate, you're getting less wealthy than the Bitcoiners are. But then there's also this interesting dynamic that I see play out often, all the time actually, where I talk to some of my friends that are like, oh, fuck, like, I should have bought Bitcoin when it was like, he's like, I got a friend who's like, my brother wanted us to buy Bitcoin. It was like $100 a coin. We're going to put in $5,000. We didn't do it. And then I'm talking to him a couple of years, ago, and it's like 10, 20 grand a coin. He's like, I missed out on $100. I should, I wish I did it. And then we're talking a couple of weeks ago, it's $100,000 a coin. He's like, I should have bought it when it was 10,000. It's going to be $1 million a coin. They'll be like, I fucking should have bought it when it's $100,000. So it's this idea that they keep missing out, but I think that they're overlooking the fundamentals, if you look at Bitcoin's convertibility into any other good or service that the marketplace can produce, theoretically should increase because we're increasing the supply of all those goods and services faster than we're increasing the supply of Bitcoin. And Bitcoin being purely monetary, there's no utility value outside of the monetary value that Bitcoin provides. You can't wire, you're not going to, it's not like gold that you're going to put it into electronic, or you're going to wrap the space shuttle with it and protect it from radiation or whatever, right? There's no industrial use. And so it's purely money. And money has infinite demand because money is a call option on any good or service that the marketplace can produce. And so this thing is going to appreciate at a faster rate than everything else forever, as long as it stays decentralized and secure. And so I think over time, more and more people will figure that out. I also do think that there's an incentive to muddle the message and like muddy the waters. When I saw Jamie Dimon on CNBC a year and a half ago or whatever, where he's like, oh yeah, well, maybe Satoshi could come back and double the supply. I'm thinking, hold on. This guy is the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. You're going to tell me he just accidentally mispronounced Satoshi's name? Like, this guy's famous for waking up in the morning and reading a couple hours. Like, this is a highly achieved individual. He could pronounce Satoshi's name, right? And so you can't corrupt the Bitcoin network. I do. I personally, that's what I think. Yeah. I think it's intentional to confuse people. Because how are you, like, let's say you're let's say you and I were part of the, I don't know, elite banking class of the world, right? And here's this freedom grenade just landed in the room. This technology that's going to change the status quo, and it's going to redistribute the power, the grip that the central banking elites have had on the world. How do you how would you grapple with that? You can't stop it. You can't turn it off. It's like Saylor says, if you want to destroy Bitcoin, it would be similar to trying to kill all the algae on planet Earth. You'd have to destroy every single cell of algae at the exact same time to get rid of it. So you'd have to destroy every node on planet Earth at the exact same time to get rid of it. So it's so improbable. I just consider it, I don't like to talk in I don't know, but I think, I think it's like,
absolutes.
in absolutes. But I do think it's like basically indestructible, right? And so if you have this, how do you grapple with that, right? You allow all the shit coining to take place. Like, I truly thought Gary Gensler would have gone after, the SEC would have gone after all these unregistered securities. He kind of talked about it. There was some discussion. I think that there was a lawsuit against the Ethereum Foundation. You had the lawsuit against XRP. But if Gary Gensler came out and said, hey, look, we're going to go after all of these as unregistered securities, we're going to put together some sort of digital, crypto security framework, and it could take us 50 years, but we're going to do that. What would happen? Everybody would sell all their shitcoins and buy Bitcoin. If he's like, look, these are unregistered securities, they're a problem, we're going to stop this. There's nothing we could do about Bitcoin. It's a digital commodity. It's an asset without an issuer. That legitimizes Bitcoin, and that basically causes the God candle, right? And so I think that there is a intentional effort to allow the confusion, to like promote the confusion in a sense, to slow this down so that these people that have a stronghold on our civilization can figure out how to deal with it.
Interesting. Because wouldn't the game theory at this point and at this level of awareness lead one to conclude that they need to stack some sats, basically, right? And naturally drive them towards Bitcoin. But yet here we are, and we're seeing these things happening even at the presidential level. And so what could that reason be other than muddying the waters? So it's like, does Bitcoin have enemies? And are those enemies mobilizing in ways where the attack vector is not so obvious, with like propaganda and spreading their tentacles into the apparatus of power, that being politics and so forth? And so is that what we're seeing right now? Are we seeing an attack on Bitcoin?
I don't necessarily think of it as an attack. I think of it more so as an attempt to slow things down to figure out what's the best strategy. And I do think that, and I say this often actually, I don't think Bitcoin is a threat to anybody. I think it's a solution for everybody, including the most evil people in our world that have done some of the most despicable things. Bitcoin solves an game theoretic economic problem for them, just like it does the individual. And so I would imagine too that we have individuals and institutions that are stacking quietly, because if you announce that you're going to stack, like you don't want to legitimize this thing and then price yourself out of it or increase your barrier to entry. You would want to quietly stack and figure out how you're going to regulate it and what you're going to do. And I think that that's kind of what we're in the midst of right now. If, like I said, if Gary G said, hey, we're going to shut all these cryptos down, but we can't shut Bitcoin down, we're not going to make it illegal. Like, that's such a deep message there that legitimizes Bitcoin, and that would cause Bitcoin to be a lot more expensive. And then if the government wants to buy some, it's more expensive. If you got the Rothschilds or the Rockefellers or whoever these people are, if they are trying to figure out if they have an influence on the world, and I think that they do, and they need some Bitcoin, they would want to definitely keep the price down as long as possible. And I think that's kind of what happened with FTX as well. I don't think, dude, Sam Bankman-Fried I think that there's like something deep that happened there. I don't think he was just some random vegan with his effective altruistic ideology that just ended up in some position where he's got this exchange. He goes offshore. He gives money to everybody. He blows up. He's hanging out with Tom Brady, all these people. And then it just like, I don't know, man. There's a conspiracy behind that, in my humble opinion, dude.
Was he a patsy set up to fail?
I think so. I do.
So, well, let's talk about where this goes. What do you see then? Has your outlook on Bitcoin adoption and its embraced by society changed? Are you looking more further out? Does it take longer? Like, what are the catalysts here that are really going to accelerate things?
I don't really know. I do think that things are going to continue on the path in which they are. I do think that we are going to end up on a Bitcoin standard someday. The whole world will be using Bitcoin. I think Saylor's publicly evolving narrative around Bitcoin, I really agree with, as controversial as it could be. Bitcoin's not a threat to the dollar currently. Bitcoin is more of a capital asset. And if you look at a monetary instrument, you could essentially put them into two categories. You have something that you can use as a medium of exchange or a currency. Then you need to preserve capital. And I think that the biggest problem that we have in the world today is around capital preservation and the hoarding of resources that other people need, like housing, and the monetizing of equities, as an example. People complain about Google being this large mega corporation that has all this power and is censoring and doing all this stuff, but then most of those people have some sort of 401k and they hold Google stock or they hold Meta stock or whatever, right? And so they complain about the world being unfair, but they're empowering it through their actions. And most people are unaware of that. But if you think about the country too, this is really just, I don't think most people think about this. Most of the savings in the world is held in equities and real estate. And maybe some bonds, and then you got some commodity, yellow shiny rocks. Like that is a fucking archaic way to hold your stored up life force. So I do think that the need for capital preservation in a way that's more energy efficient too, because you have you have a cost associated with owning real estate. You have to, maintain your building, 1% annual average maintenance cost. Then you're going to have real estate tax, 1 or 2%, depending on your jurisdiction. So that's 2% at minimum that you're going to have to allocate just to holding that economic energy, holding that asset, right? So an asset that has zero ownership cost is more attractive than one that you have to. Then you're like trying to save your money, and you got a couple rental houses. Well, now you got to rent them out. Now you're a service provider. You don't necessarily go into, hey, I want to become a landlord so I could be a service provider. You're just trying to figure out where to park your capital, your surplus, right? And so I think that that's kind of the Trojan horse. People are going to start adopting a increasing allocation to Bitcoin because it's so much more efficient. The appreciation is there. And I think that over time, that becomes a larger percentage of people's portfolio, you could say. But the thing that's so unique and special about Bitcoin is it's capable of being the world's currency as well as the world reserve capital asset. And so it is this kind of Trojan horse of freedom in that sense. So, yeah, and I have, and what do I know?
We're experiencing that here in El Salvador, right? Where you have this pristine capital asset that you can hold, but at the same time, you can then also spend. And it's like, it makes more sense to do. I know people say, why would you want to spend Bitcoin? But in a situation where you're long Bitcoin and where like most of your capital is in Bitcoin and you get paid in Bitcoin and so forth, right? Mm-hmm. Why would you want to spend the conversion fees to go to fiat in order to pay someone when you could just send them sats? You understand what I'm saying? So
totally.
Yeah, maybe it starts off as a store of value, but the fact that it's also a medium of exchange makes it very powerful in my regard, in my perspective, as a way to bypass the fiat legacy system and actually compete with the dollar. That's where I might like defer with you on that idea. But it's going to take time from my perspective, right? But like over here in El Salvador, you have this kind of experiment playing out where you get to see the green shoots of that happening.
Yeah. Yeah, but I also, so what I was just going to say or add to my thought there, I think that because of the properties of Bitcoin and the incentives baked into like how are you going to get the Bitcoin, and then layer that on top of how the fiat system works, where they're essentially with fractional reserve banking, you have monetary units, dollars, being lent into existence as debt against assets. But the assets that the dollars are being lent into existence against are increasing in supply. Real estate is an example. So the real estate is being diluted. We're making it more efficiently. It's less energy exertion to produce the house. So in real terms, the houses are becoming less valuable. So it's not really great collateral. And as much as I would like to see fiat go away and the world be on a Bitcoin only standard, we have to transition from fiat to Bitcoin. And how do we get through that transition without a complete apocalyptic, anarchist, chaotic fucking meltdown, right? And so that's where I think we're going to see, and then SAB 121 or 126, I think SAB 121 got rescinded. So now banks can custody Bitcoin. I think what we're going to see is banks are going to offer up BLOCs, Bitcoin equity lines of credit. So print dollars essentially through fractional reserve banking as debt against Bitcoin, which continues to perpetuate the fiat system. However, the change now is that the collateral that's backing that debt isn't losing value in real terms. So it should theoretically in time decrease the requirement of dollar debasement and help stabilize the system. And I want to see fiat go away, but I want to see it happen with as little carnage as possible. And so I'm by no means a fan of the dollar, but I am a fan of a smooth transition. And so I think that that's kind of what's taking place. And so Bitcoin, and I think that's what Saylor sees as well. What do I know? I'm just a dude. Saylor's on a whole nother level. And in some sense, he understands, and always has a very deep understanding. But I think that's what he's speaking to, though, is like, look, the most effective way to get this into the hands of the most people is by getting them to understand that it's a superior savings technology. That's like step one. And then I think in time, what you're going to see is so the banks that are going to offer up BLOCs, there's going to be competition. So JP Morgan Chase, so I can go with Ledin right now. I don't know, 10, 15% or something I can borrow against my Bitcoin. Well, then you're going to have JP Morgan Chase. They're going to come out 8%, 10%, 9%, whatever it is. Then Wells Fargo's like, well, we'll do it at 7%. And Bank of America's like, we'll do it at blah, blah, blah. And the marginal cost of production of producing the fiat is essentially zero. So that competition in the marketplace will drive the interest rates down. And that's going to incentivize people to borrow against their Bitcoin, which the fiat system has to continue to debase to stay solvent. If they stopped printing money tomorrow, the prices on everything will start to go down. You'll have deflation in the economy, which is a good thing. However, we are currently in a paradigm where everybody owes money against a lot of the assets that they own, their real estate. So then you have insolvencies take place, and then who owns what? It would be like an apocalypse. Like the person who owns the house is going to be the guy who's got the most guns on that street or something, right? So you can't, there needs to be a smooth transition. And I think that's kind of what I see playing out over the next, 10, 20, 30, 50 years or whatever.
Well, going into that a little bit more, right? We're moving into an age of AI where it looks like things are going to be done a lot more efficiently and cheaper. Then you also have robotics. And so there's this question right now, which is how much are we going to need human labor to do a lot of the things that are done by people in the job market? And so my question to you here is like, you're going to have all this downward pressure on jobs. At the same time, the federal government needs to print in order to create the currency units to keep the system afloat. And so we are going to have upward pressure on prices through inflation. And do you see Bitcoin then being like this life raft that would help people navigate this transition phase?
I absolutely do. However, I believe that the current system, if you will, is not going, and the people pulling the levers are not going to communicate that. Like, you're not going to see President Trump come out and be like, look, we're dealing with a crisis where a lot of jobs are going away. We're creating a deflationary environment. We're going to have to issue universal basic income as the marketplace and our civilization becomes more technologically advanced and we become more productive. We're going to have less jobs. That dynamic is incompatible with the fiat system. People are going to be out of work. They're not going to be able to afford to survive. So what you should do is you should transition off of a fiat standard and onto a Bitcoin standard so you can benefit from the productivity gains that the marketplace produces. I don't think anybody's going to come out and directly say that, right? And so I think that there is going to be a really weird time, and like, we're in it and it's accelerating. But Bitcoin, I do believe Bitcoin is the solution, because with a supply cap of 21 million and being a purely monetary instrument, it reflects in its purchasing power the productivity gains in the marketplace. So as the marketplace becomes more efficient, then your spending power increases, right? And so you live in that truly deflationary world. And then everybody can eventually survive and live out like an existence where they can do what they're passionate about. And you're not this slave to this like system that's like, where the productivity gains from the marketplace generally are being harvested. When the currency is being debased, the recipients of the newly minted currency are effectively capturing the productivity gains from the marketplace, from the productive class, and then allocating that capital towards whatever endeavors they want. If you have 2% GDP, the 2% GDP, at least my understanding is that that's an increase in goods and services. The marketplace produced 2% more goods and services. But then if you debase the currency by 2% to keep prices stable, you've effectively taken that 2% out of the marketplace, and whoever the recipient of that newly minted currency is captures that productivity gain. So it's a theft mechanism for sure. And on a Bitcoin standard, if you can't debase the Bitcoin, then that productivity gain is reflected in a 2%, let's say it's a 2% increase annually. And that's increasing, like Jeff Booth talks about this with AI, that's going up, right? So our GDP, or that true productivity gain annually, should be 3, 4, 5, 6%. And that would be reflected in increase in purchasing power in your dollar, or in your Bitcoin, excuse me. And so, yeah, I think Bitcoin is the solution to this crisis that that in some ways we're gonna find ourselves in.
So let me ask you, what's the spectrum there, right? You talk about, hey, I am a fan of a smooth landing, all right, a smooth transition. We don't want this economic apocalypse upon us, but it's still yet to be seen how this all turns out, and kind of what are your two ends of the spectrum there as far as how this turns out and what's more likely?
Oof, I don't know. So I'm an optimist by choice, and also because when I really think deeply and kind of tap into that more spiritual, metaphysical part of myself, or realm, or whatever you want to call, I do think that things will work out well, but I just don't know how that's going to happen necessarily. I think hindsight's always 20/20. I think our brain is really good at understanding how things happened, but not so good at understanding how things are going to happen. And so in some sense, I also do believe, what does Joe Dispenza say? Energy flows where attention goes. So I like to think about things working out in an optimistic, positive way, right? And so I don't necessarily know how that's going to be, but I don't think we're going to end up in some situation where it's total economic meltdown. I do believe we're in a fucking real recession right now. You have good times on Wall Street and it's carnage on Main Street. Yeah, but I don't know. And I think, too, after doing a bit of traveling last year, it's kind of the first time in my life I've done any traveling. I saw a lot of the world, been to El Salvador a few times, went all over Europe. I was in Tennessee for the conference, saw several countries in Europe. And people are really generally kind, compassionate, sharing. Like, I think that there's an element like we're gonna figure this out collectively. And the way Bitcoin serves the self-interest of the individual while simultaneously serving the interest of the collective, it is this thing where you're not going into Bitcoin thinking like, hey, I'm going into Bitcoin and I'm going to take this very selfless, hard approach to try to make the world better. Although that's the case, it's also the most selfish thing. So I think that just in time, more and more people are going to, adopt a Bitcoin treasury standard, savings, strategy, whatever. And I do think, and it's kind of a deep thought in some sense, but the more I think about it, I can't really dispute it. I do think that Bitcoin will stabilize the fiat system because there's nothing backing the fiat system other than, it's like the clip. I just saw the clip again from Nayib Bukele where he's like, so wait, why the government needs money, so it issues treasury bonds, and then the Federal Reserve buys the treasury bonds, and what's backing the currency that they create is the treasury bonds. So essentially nothing's backing it but the government and the debt. He goes, it's just a bunch of money printing. And why are you paying taxes? So you feel like it's like, I forget the exact words he used, but essentially, so you feel like you're funding the government, but you're really not. So there's nothing backing it. It's like the world is insolvent. And Satoshi is brought a technology that's going to bring solvency back into the world. And I think that just over time, that stability that Bitcoin provides is going to be the base layer economically for everything to kind of settle to. And so I do think, and it's just very an intuitive feeling, and being an optimistic person, I think that there will be a natural, smooth-ish, I guess you could say, transition to that place where Bitcoin is that base layer that everything is settled to. And I don't really know exactly how that's going to unfold, but I think that the incentive is so high for everybody that I think just naturally over time it'll happen. It's self-preservation. Everybody wants to survive.
All right. So you mentioned that Bitcoin aligns the incentive of the individual to the collective. And I want to kind of explore more the micro angle of that, the individual, right? And how Bitcoin actually transforms an individual and transforms their mindset and their beliefs, their habits, and so forth. I guess we could start with you, right? You, since you've came into Bitcoin, how has your life transformed, and what does Bitcoin mean to you?
Oof, yeah, I don't know. That's a wow. Well, I think, I'm one of the individuals, like Eric Kaysen said a long time ago, and I just love this. He's like, Bitcoin is messianic. It's of the Messiah. There is something divine and godlike about Bitcoin. It's capital, is another thing he says, capital T truth. It's the highest form of truth. It's this indisputable truth protocol. And I think in some, and so another thing that I think about is like, it's like Satoshi merged the physical world with the metaphysical world. Like Saylor said in a podcast a long time, like he lit a fire in cyberspace. He brought life to a dead realm. He merged the physical world with the digital world. Well, the digital world, as far as I'm concerned, it's the realm beyond, the ethers, the quantum field, the infinite whatever, I don't know, right? And so I don't know that there's a difference there between the digital and the metaphysical. It's the invisible realm. And so because you have this invisible finite instrument, it's like another thing Saylor says is the discovery of matter in cyberspace. And I like to think of it as like the discovery of matter in the metaphysical realm. And humans, including myself, like we want to figure out how to procure resources to sustain ourselves, to hedge ourselves against future uncertainty, or the certain future of like you're going to be old and rickety and you're not going to be able to go through the world and procure resources very effectively, right? And so
the purpose of money.
Totally, right? It's money is like your life. It's like what does Mahler say? It's like it's like abs. Oh, fuck, I can't. It's like your time and energy in an abstracted form. And so you'll always want more time and energy. You'll never be able to cap someone's desire for more time and energy. I kind of think about it, a metaphor I've used in the past is like we're like squirrels going through the proverbial forest of life, right? And you're trying to gather some acorns to survive the winter. And if you could get enough acorns to survive multiple winters, you would do that if they would last, right? If you could, like, why not? If I could get enough acorns to survive 10 winters or the rest of my life and I could do it in one summer, like that would be awesome. However, the issue is what if I figured out how, and I'm this squirrel, figured out how to gather all the acorns in the forest and now other squirrels don't have acorns? That's the problem. But if you could dematerialize the acorn, or you could make some sort of instrument that's dematerialized, it's invisible, it's truly scarce, and it's convertible into acorns when you need them, then you could hoard that, and that's not unethical, because then now actually and there's another element with it being finite in supply, its convertibility into the things that are not finite in supply that we're going to produce more of will increase. So now you're incentivized to not hoard all the acorns in the forest, but just the ones that you need, and then hold on to this. I think about it as a metaphysical instrument, this invisible monetary instrument that then you could later convert into acorns or goods and services when you need them. So you can't prevent somebody from hoarding, but if you could hoard this invisible thing, then dude, who needs 40 houses? You don't need 40 houses. You can only live in one at a time. There are wealthy people who own empty homes. And there are then people who want a nice house that can't afford the nice house because somebody is using them essentially as money and they're hoarding them. So you can never prevent somebody from trying to hoard. You want to preserve as much life force, energy, capital, whatever you want to call it, as possible. And now that we've bridged the gap and we've entered the invisible, the digital, the metaphysical realm, and we've discovered this scarcity there, it's like this powerful invisible instrument that I could just send through space and time and trade for what I need. And because it's finite, it's increasing in its purchasing power, then the incentive is to hold that. And actually the hoarding of that helps everybody else who's using that monetary instrument, because you're pulling out units out of the supply, increasing the purchasing power of other people's units. And then the incentive too, people are like, oh, what if Satoshi comes back and just dumps all the coins? Well, let's say you have some whale as an example. Why would they sell the Bitcoin? What do you want to sell the Bitcoin for? Only something that you want to increase the quality of your life with. Like, it's the final trade. I love that saying. Like, Bitcoin, I love referring to it as the final trade. People are like, oh, when are you going to sell it? Like, for what? Like, for things that I need to live? Like, okay, I would do that, but I'm not going to sell my Bitcoin for a real estate portfolio or for Apple stock or for gold or for bonds or forever. There's nothing better than the Bitcoin. So the incentive is to hold the Bitcoin and only deploy it when you need something to sustain yourself, which also ties into like the Keynesian lie that you need debasement of the currency to keep the velocity of money up. Like, people know that a year from now, Apple's going to release a better iPhone. And they still go buy the iPhone now, and then they go buy a new one a year later, right? So people are going to continue to go. Like, you're not going to be like, hey, I can't eat dinner tonight because the purchasing power of my money is going to be so much higher next month. I'm just going to forego the things that I need to sustain myself. So the Bitcoin incentivizes prudence, fiscal prudence. It decentivizes hoarding of goods and resources that other people need to sustain themselves that exist in the physical realm. I hope that all makes sense. It's kind of a abstract, wide explanation there, but
I'm vibing with
the
you,
way
man.
I see it.
Keep it going. Awesome. So going back, so how has that impacted you? I mean, do you feel more enlightened as a human being? Do you feel more aligned? Do you feel like you know yourself better now because of Bitcoin? Do you feel like, how has that impacted you spiritually, metaphysically? What impact has Bitcoin had on you?
Well, I'm definitely going through some sort of like deep transformation within my life. And I don't know exactly what it all means at this point, but in some sense, because I have so aggressively and for long enough now adopted the Bitcoin position that I have now this opportunity to slow down, really take an inventory, like an accurate inventory of my life. Who am I? Where am I at? What do I have? What do I believe? What beliefs do I have that have created the life that I have and the person that I am? And how much of that is something that I want to take into the future? What do I want to change about myself? What's really important to me? I'm thinking about, I'm expanding my family. I got a kid. I want to have more kids. I got a beautiful wife. I'm super pumped about like the foundation of my life. And now what do I want to do with that? And like, going back to like the velocity of money and the idea of like its increase in purchasing power versus a money that is decreasing purchasing power. Like if you're holding on to Bitcoin and you're going to deploy any capital, like it really makes you think about like, do I really need these things? What do I want? How long should I wait to move to a different area or start some sort of entrepreneurial endeavor? Because in some sense, like, the most prudent thing to do in a lot of ways is just hold on to the Bitcoin and sit there and do nothing. But then you're doing nothing. And like life is finite. Like it goes by so quick. I'm 40 years old. It feels like I was a child just yesterday. Like I can't believe how fast it goes by. In the moment, it feels like you're watching paint dry. It takes forever. But then in hindsight, you're like, holy shit, where'd all this time go? Like it'll be over really quickly. So you have to do things with your life. But then that's where I think Bitcoin helps it incentivizes the prudence, and it really gives you the opportunity to do that deep inner work and search for like, what is it that brings me joy? What do I want to spend my life doing? In some sense, now that I've been kind of liberated from the fiat paradigm, from those pressures that the fiat world. And I actually don't even think it's the fiat world. I call it the BB world, the before Bitcoin world, where everything that you could ever hold on to attempt to project your energy into the future was leaky in some ways. It was bleeding energy. You're being diluted. You buy real estate, we're making more houses. You buy land, there's so much land. Like you buy gold, we're increasing the gold supply by 2-3% a year. Like everything that you could hold before Bitcoin had a leakage associated with it. So you have to continue to exert energy just to maintain the energy that you've already stored up. And so, yeah, it's like, we live in a different time. Like I'll add something in there, but go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in. It sounds like, for me, what I relate that to is the constant decision-making that we have to go through on what to spend our Bitcoin on what is worth spending our Bitcoin on. And through that process, right, even though it's slow, it creates some type of transformation, some type of metamorphosis within you, right? Mm-hmm. Because now all of a sudden you are literally evaluating what you value every day. And that process, that process then makes you have to confront some real questions as to what is important. And that helps you grow as an individual. Mm-hmm. That's what I got from what you were saying.
Yeah, thank you. That was good. I think... I think so. Simulation theory is the idea that with technological advancement, computing power, AI, virtual realities, so on, that at some point it's logical to think that we'd be able to create a simulated reality that's indistinguishable from base reality. If that's the case, it's actually not probable that we live in base reality. So if we live in a
realities do we live in?
I don't know, but it's definitely a fun thought. And so if that's the case, and we live in some sort of a simulation, and then physicists, they're trying to look to the deepest building blocks of the cosmos, and they're finding out that there's nothing there. It's just empty space. And I even heard, I forget the guy's name, but he talks about simulation theory. There's a good YouTube clip on. It might be the first one that pulls up if you put in simulation theory. They're seeing computer code at the deepest layers in the building blocks of what makes up the physical reality. I could be botching some of the details there, but in some sense, and this is just like a fun, crazy woo-woo thought that I have, it's like Satoshi updated the simulation. It's like we got this update 2.0, whatever, like the planet Earth, human reality, like boop, update, and the simulation is now different. And it's almost like he fixed a problem in our reality, in that all we were limited to the physicality of things. And that has the incentive to violence, because if there's physical resources that you're saving or anyone is saving and they're storing up to deploy at a later date, and I want some of that, if I'm a sociopathic perpetrator and I say to you, hey, I want some of your resources, and you say, I don't know, you could get fucked, I'm definitely not interested in giving up my stuff here, and I just kill you, then I get all of it. So the incentive is to just kill and steal. But now if you can hold your economic energy, your surplus, your stored up life force in an inviolable, like I say, metaphysical instrument that I can't get if I kill you, and now I want something from you, even if I am a sociopath, now I got to negotiate with you. As they say on the streets, you got to come correct. Like, you ain't getting shit from me if you don't offer up a deal that I want. So it actually incentivizes us to like work together and produce and have consensual exchange, and it decentivizes the violence. And I think that that's a really big, monumentally big deal. And so I do look at, it's like the AB world and the BB world. After Bitcoin, before Bitcoin. Before Bitcoin, we were limited to the physicality of property. Now that we have finality of supply with a metaphysical or a digital or an invisible, whatever you want to call it, instrument, it completely changes the game theory. It completely changes the incentive structure. It rewards honest market participants and it punishes dishonest market participants, because you have this immutable ledger to settle everything down to that nobody can fudge or I don't know, put a fraudulent transaction on, that anybody can audit anywhere in the world with an internet connection. That is so monumentally profound. And I feel like it's going to take us from this like shit throwing baboon, yellow shiny rock hoarding, archaic like Neanderthal era into the golden age. Like our civilization just got an upgrade that's going to catalyze some really incredible things. And so that long-term thought process is so inspiring and feels so good. Like what the discovery of Bitcoin for me was almost, it was like the end of this nihilistic feeling that I had deep down inside of me, where it's like, the world is so fucked. Like, what do I do? I was like depressed, dude. But it's like, oh my gosh, this quite literally changes everything. Like Jeff Booth says, it's imposing a new rule set on our civilization. It's like the great imposition. It's imposing a new way of operating in this reality, and the world is fundamentally different. And everything will organize around it.
So there's this idea that violence basically underpins everything in our reality. And, you know, what I'm hearing from you right now is that Bitcoin changes that. Does it change it to a degree where violence has more of a minimal impact, but it still dictates a lot of how this world works? Or does it fundamentally completely change it where violence becomes absolutely like unnecessary or becomes a bad strategy in getting what you want?
Yeah, I don't know really, but what comes to mind is Jason Lowery's work. And I'm not going to be able to articulate this nearly as well as he does, but my understanding is that violence was the only decentralized protocol, I guess you could say, of disputing this, as I think he says, the state and chain and custody of property. Basically, who owns what. Like, if you and I have a dispute over who owns some real estate, let's say, we're going to have to go to a trusted third party. We have a dispute over, yeah, I don't know, some legal issue. We go to a trusted third party. We go to court. They're going to help us figure it out, right? We're involving a third party. But without that third party, if you boil it down to like, yeah, and of course we don't want, generally most people don't want to default to violence. And then he also has this idea around, that's why like wolf packs, for example, when they're going to figure out who's the alpha doesn't actually want to kill the other wolf that he dominates because you need a strong wolf pack. And so if you just kill everybody, then there you are alone, like we're stronger in numbers and we're contending with entropy and this reality and nature and all these things. So we need other people. We're stronger in numbers. And so if there is an unresolvable dispute, violence is the only decentralized mechanism to work through that dispute. And proof of work in Bitcoin is now the other decentralized way of disputing the state and chain and custody of property. Who owns what spots on this ledger? What UTXOs do you own? It's the mining, and it's projecting real world energy. It's electricity. So it's electric power projection as opposed to kinetic power projection. And actually on that note, I will say that we're going to see, we should theoretically see a lot less violence in the world. We should see less kinetic power projection, and we should see more electric power projection to dispute who owns what. Because if you take the $900 trillion worth of stuff that people own in the world, it's said that half of that $900 trillion is just capital preservation. So if you take that out and you put that into Bitcoin, now you've demonetized all the physical things that we need in the world. They've come down to their utility value. And then the real wealth in the world is now the Bitcoin. And then disputing who owns the Bitcoin through the mining process incentivizes and quite literally pays our civilization to figure out how to make faster computing chips and harness energy more effectively. So it's multiple things are going on there that are good for the long term for the civilization. And then it, once again, decentivizing or giving us another option instead of violence to figure out who owns what, I think is, because I don't think that even the most evil, diabolical people in the world, and maybe they do, but I don't think they get off on the violence, right? Like, I mean, it's like there's this certain element, like, for all of time, we're just like, we have tribes and groups of people, and you're going through life, and even if you're not like the barbarians, you're going and conquering, you have to prevent yourself from being conquered. So you have to be able to project violence to survive. But I don't think people enjoy that generally on average. Like, people don't like that, right? And so, I don't know. I think that there's a big evolution taking place there, and the electric power projection to dispute who owns what is going to make our civilization more energy abundant, more peaceful. The fact that you can't get somebody's Bitcoin if you want it. If the United States government wants somebody's Bitcoin, like, they have to incentivize the exchange there. Like, they're a service provider. What services are you providing? Like, look, I don't know. And I know a lot, like, on that note, like the Asian guy who's sitting in front of a tank, I forget what war it was. I don't know. It's a famous photo. And there's a bunch of tanks, and maybe it was Vietnam. I don't know. But he's like,
I think it was Tiananmen Square.
Yeah, I think that's it. And he's like, I don't give a fuck. You could run me over, right? Like, and that's the way I look at a lot of these Bitcoiners. Like, there's so many Bitcoiners that are gonna be like, look, you could put me in a camp for the rest of my life. I'm fucking revolutionary. I'm not giving you my keys, right? And so that's like that great imposition. That's where the governments and the powerful entities in this world, if they want the Bitcoin, as they say on the streets, they need to come correct. They need to offer up value. And so now
I'm thinking about it. I'm just thinking honey badger energy, man. Like straight up, like you're going to have to run me over, like just like you said, in order to get my Bitcoin. Like, it has to be something worthwhile for me to actually give up my private keys to you. If not, I am going to stand here in front of you like I'm going to stand in front of a tank or whatever, get eaten by jackals or lions or whatever, right? Straight honey badger energy.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's that change from, the incentive to violence to the incentive to peace and consent. I think that's just such a big deal. Yeah.
So what would be one thing that if you could snap your fingers and have someone understand about Bitcoin, one concept, right? Like, what would that be?
that there's ownership cost and dilution associated with every other single thing that you could own as a savings instrument. Hold on just a second. I got some weird rattle here. Give me a moment. Yeah, but I think most people are unaware of the fact that there's dilution in their real estate, their gold, their equities, even though they are in dollar terms appreciating, they're not appreciating in real terms. Like what comes to mind is, I think in June, I was in Prague, and Swan, one of their episodes, they showed a chart of the S&P index over the last 100 years in dollar terms, hockey stick to the right, but when adjusted for M2 to complete the algebraic equation, how many monetary units are in the system, it's actually down like 0.5% or 1% every year. So most people are unaware that their real estate is depreciating in real terms, just like the vehicles in their driveway are. Like everybody understands that their cars are going down in value, but they think their houses are going up in value. But their houses are also going down in value. They just can't see it because what they're measuring the value of the house in is going down in value fast enough that the house is appreciating in the dollar terms, but the dollar isn't being debased fast enough so that the automobile is appreciating. So it's this optical illusion. It's this false perception of acquiring wealth. Yeah, I think that's the biggest one. That if I could implant that thought into every human brain on planet Earth, that would be the one. And then the solution to that is Bitcoin, because the supply is not increasing once we hit 21 million. And the stock to flow currently is the hardest asset on planet Earth. It's harder than gold, whatever, right? And so, but that's the big one. People are operating in the world with this false idea of accruing wealth through holding these assets that are actually not appreciating in real terms. One of the things that I've said that I like to think about too is like everything on planet Earth is losing value or becoming more abundant, becoming cheaper, except for Bitcoin. And actually currently, until we get to 21 million coins, Bitcoin is being debased because we're adding to the supply. It's just at a slower rate than everything else. But once we hit 21 million, Bitcoin's not going up in value necessarily. It's just fixed. And its convertibility into everything else is increasing because the supply of literally everything else is increasing while the supply of Bitcoin is not. So everything on planet Earth is losing value except for Bitcoin. And the Bitcoin's not gaining value. It's only gaining value relative to everything else on planet Earth. That's the biggest, I think, most important thing for people to like. If people understood that, then you have what I was talking about earlier. Then now the capital allocation for capital preservation or for savings or investing or whatever you want to call it becomes much more Bitcoin prominent. And then over time you realize, well, hold on, why would I want to convert my Bitcoin into this currency, pay a small fee when I could just use the Lightning Network and pay with my Bitcoin? And I think over time people will figure that out. I don't know how long it takes, to get to a true Bitcoin standard. But I am actually, when people are like, when are we going to get there? It could take, it's 15 years, 16 years. Like, look at what has happened in a monumentally short period of time. Like 2009, like that's not that long ago. The rate of change is just absolutely incredible. And then going back to what you were talking about earlier with AI, the productivity gains, the insolvency with the fiat system as a whole, like there's so many things that are just like building. It's like the spring is just loading. I don't know. There's a lot of things that should theoretically drive us into Bitcoin even faster. And I think it's happening fast, honestly. Like it's really easy to sit there and watch, the paint dry. I felt like last year I was watching the paint dry. I have friends that I have like orange pilled over the years. And I get a call from one of them the other day. They're like, hey, what's going on with Bitcoin? Oh, it just crashed. I'm like, you got to realize that, like, what was it? In September, it's 60 grand. So like 4 or 5 months ago, it's 60 grand. It's like 80 grand. And you're like, so it's like, I got to zoom it. They're like, oh yeah, it's easy to forget that, like it's happening fast. This is at least what I think.
Awesome. Eric, anything else you want to say? Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter, Eric V Stacks. I've been quiet recently. I've been doing, my inner work, spending a lot of quality time with my family, trying to figure out what's important to me in this life. Like what do I want to do really? What value can I add? What do I believe? What beliefs do I have that are limiting my experience in life? And the limitation that you experience as a human, and I believe that we're spiritual beings having a human experience, right? And it's finite. I feel like we're these limitless, eternal beings that chose in some capacity, somehow, some way to have this human experience, to experience limitation. And so life is limited. It's what makes it so beautiful. And that's also what makes Bitcoin so fucking beautiful. It's limited. There will only ever be 21 million. And I think that's something in some profound way where there's that divinity. There's something so, I don't know, kind of godlike, like, Max Kaiser would say or whatever about Bitcoin. It's just divine. It is. And it's so much more than a monetary instrument. There's a spiritual, ideological element to Bitcoin that's so deep and so profound. And I'm just really grateful that it exists. Honestly, I feel like it transitioned. It was like the thing that took me personally and so many other the Bitcoin community and so many people in the Bitcoin community that I talk to resonate with this and have experienced a similar thing, where it's like the thing that they found that transmuted their distaste for the world into like true excitement for this life and this time and place that we're in. Like, I do think this is the most beautiful time to live in all of history. In some sense, it's the worst of times, but it's also the best of times. It depends on your perspective. Yeah. So I would just say, be grateful and focus. And the other thing I want to, and I try to encourage other people to do, because it really helps me, is focus on the things that you want to see happen in the world. If you have an issue with Clown World, and this is one of the things Jeff Booth talks about that I love so much, if you go through life fucked up over Clown World, focusing all the atrocities taking place, yelling at Clown World, hate tweeting, all the things, you're really actually feeding it. And if you want to change the world, completely defund it with your energy, put all your focus into the world you want to see. The positivity, the productivity, the fairness, the abundance, all that stuff, right? And so, yeah, that's what I like to focus on. And I do think that, things are really good. They're also kind of chaotic. They're scary. I'm kind of dealing with that on my own, like in my own personal path. Like, I'm embarking on a new chapter in my life, and I oscillate back and forth between like being really excited and trusting and knowing it all works out, to being scared and wanting to default back into the things that I'm accustomed to that make me comfortable. And yeah, I think that, we're going into the unknown. But I truly believe in like the depth of my being that things are going to get really good. And so that's what side of history I want to be on. That's what I want to manifest. That's what I want to help other people to focus on, so we can co-create that. Let's build the world we want to see. It's such a fucking beautiful world. And we have the technology now. Satoshi fucking liberated us from the shackles of physicality and the incentive to violence. It's a fundamentally different reality. If we live in a simulation, he's like somehow he upgraded the simulation. It's a different game, and it's beautiful.
Eric, man, it's always good to talk to you. That's a great note to end off on. And yeah, thanks for coming on. And we got to talk again sometime and shoot the shit one more time, because it's always like a burst of energy when you come through. So appreciate you, man.
Cool, man. I appreciate the conversation. It's always fun chatting with you, bro.